Andrew, Nuro recently announced a pivot. You're moving away from, it looks like the R2 vehicles, the R3 vehicles, to a licensing model. Why the pivot? Why now?
Sure. Well, first, good to see you, Grayson. Thanks for having me. To answer that question, I'd like to go back in time a little bit. So let's go back to the early part of 2023. The macro backdrop at the time was not particularly favorable. The NASDAQ, I think, was down almost 50% from where it is today. Interest rates were on their way up significantly. And Nuro specifically was at a really interesting fork in the road. We basically were at this inflection point where we had to decide, do we start to scale commercially in earnest, or do we double down on our core competency, get autonomy to a place where the unit economics were very favorable, the technology was very mature and scalable at favorable unit economics, and really push on that front? And what we decided to do, as you'll recall, is to basically pause commercial deployment, pause the production, or not go forward with the production of the custom delivery vehicle R3 at the time, and instead get really, really hyper focused on getting autonomy to a scalable place. And part of what catalyzed that decision too was the progress that we had seen as we were implementing AI and ML across the entire autonomy stack. So everything from mapping, perception, behavior, everything. We were starting to see really, really promising results. And so when you fast forward today, 18, 24 months later, we've seen tremendous progress on the autonomy side. And I think the big catalyst for making this shift away from the custom delivery vehicle and towards the transport of both passengers and goods was the fact that autonomy has come so far and it can now safely and comfortably transport people. And so that unlock, that opening up of that new opportunity has effectively got us to the place where we say, okay, we don't have to constrain the problem to delivery. And as a result, we've decided to make this shift to focusing on licensing the Nuro Driver for use cases across both people and goods transport.
It was a smart move because if you look at point blank, all the economic uncertainty during that period was pretty high. So you have the backdrop of economic uncertainty, and you started, I'm going to go down to labs and Caltech and MIT and Stanford. You started to see some really interesting AI ML breakthroughs. Did that play a role in making this decision for what you saw coming out of these labs?
I don't know if the labs in particular were something that were weighted all that heavily. I think it was more about the general acceleration of progress that AI and ML were causing. The progress in the last 18 months has really been tremendous. I mean, you've done ride-alongs with us before, Grayson, so you have a sense of where the technology is. But when we think about building a company and a product that is scalable, I think one of the big things that is really important is focusing on your core competency. And going back in time again, kind of to Nuro 1.0, so to speak, Nuro was planning to basically own the whole value chain. We were going to build autonomy, we were going to produce the vehicle, we were going to own and operate the vehicles. And between both the acceleration of progress and the changing macro backdrop, we decided to get very focused on building autonomy. I think the other tailwind that precipitated this decision was the formation of this ecosystem in the AV industry. So basically, we saw a future where we didn't have to own the entire value chain and that other parties would start to come in and participate in things like asset ownership and operation. And there would be more vehicles available that were L4 ready that we could integrate into. And so all of these things coalesced together to where we really knew that we had to be capital efficient as an independent company. The acceleration of the technology and the early formation of this ecosystem was going to allow us to do that. And so far, I think, as you've seen with the recent driverless deployment, we really think that it was the right decision. We'll have some announcements soon on the commercial side that will validate it from a business model standpoint, but we're tremendously excited about the future.
Point blank, your car performed flawlessly when we drove around Mountain View. Second of all, it was the right decision because the market has been well documented is skating towards or moving towards licensing. That's what they want. The big advantage that I see that you have, you're not owned by a big tech company that most of them start with the letter A. You're not owned by Alphabet. You're not owned by Amazon. You're not owned by Apple. And you're also not owned by an OEM. What advantages that give you? Because it seems to me that you could play this really interesting role as Switzerland as autonomy becomes a licensable business?
Sure. So, two main things I would point to. One is on the product side. It gives us a lot of flexibility to tailor a solution to what customers need without being beholden to the interests or agenda of a parent company. And we can talk more about that at a later date when we have commercial announcements. But when you think about other AV companies that are owned by these large parents, they cannot service certain customers because of competitive pressures. And that becomes a real constraint and a real headwind for them. Our independence gives us a lot of flexibility, which we think in the long term will create a lot of value. The other thing I would talk about at a company level is the surprising benefits of having to be capital efficient. Nuro is an independent company. We have raised 2 billion to date from really top tier investors, and on its face that sounds like a lot, but building AV, building vehicles is incredibly expensive. And so our day-to-day MO, how we operate the company, requires us to be incredibly capital efficient. And that constraint has bred a lot of creativity. It's forced us to make the product a lot more efficient and cost effective for our customers. And it's forced us to find a business model, namely this licensing model that focuses on our core competency that is much more capital efficient and doesn't require as much capital in the long term. So ultimately, whatever AV company you look at, you have to build a sustainable business. You have to get to profitability. Whether it's a parent or other investors, you can't expect investors to subsidize your growth and R&D indefinitely. And so we are laying the foundation now. It's hard, I'll be honest, but when you lay the foundation now for both a capital efficient company and a very favorable unit economic product, it will pay dividends down the road.
It pays dividends. And here's the other thing, get into the economic weeds. You don't have the European headwinds where some of these larger global OEMs are facing European headwinds where they're having to cut their America's R&D budget. You're not faced with that because you're independent. Advantage there. Downside is they have the ability to buy more GPUs just because of their size. How much of the capital that you've raised has gone to engineering and GPUs?
The vast majority of capital that we have invested to date is to build the core autonomy system. Now, when you think about the breakdown of headcount versus cloud spend, so on, that's not a level of detail I can kind of rattle off in this setting. But again, it's expensive, as you know. And I think ultimately being efficient in how you use those resources builds a better product, because trying to develop a technology with unconstrained compute, for example, does not translate to building a business that has favorable unit economics. And so when we think about the cost of the system that we're building, we know that it needs to work for our customers at the end of the day, whether that is an L4 mobility service platform, whether it's a personally owned vehicle via an OEM. We have to make this cost effective. And so that's been paramount in terms of how we develop the technology, and forcing ourselves to be capital efficient helps to that end.
You're spot on. How are you making it capital efficient? Is it through breakthroughs with the AI, the ML? Is it you're able to source different parts to go into the stack? How are you making it cost efficient?
Sure. Two things I would point to in terms of cost efficiency. One is just how we run the business, how we build teams, how we think about achieving efficiency. We spend a lot of time as a company thinking about how we can be more efficient, how we can use fewer resources to achieve the same outcome. Two is the actual cost of the hardware. We've made huge investments to bring down the cost of our sense and compute. We'll have more to share on that at a later date. But when we think about the core value prop of the Nuro Driver, we are really trying to build the most scalable self-driving system out there. And when it comes to scalability, there are a few things that go into that. One is the cost of the hardware. Two is the capital needs of actually scaling the business. We don't have to go out and raise billions of dollars in order to scale because of this licensing model. And three is just finding a model for customers that provides really solid margins for them from day one, such that we don't have to subsidize the early deployments and have to have unit economics in the early stages that are just unfavorable.
I'm a huge fan, but you call me bullish of licensing models. I think that's really, truly the future of autonomy. I believe you're going to have a series of operating systems very similar to you have Mac OS and you have Linux and you have Windows. The same thing's going to happen on autonomy. As you update and you grow your business, who's going to manage the over-the-air update? So if I'm on Windows, okay, you got an update from Windows. If I'm on Mac, I got an update from Mac or from Linux, depending on what kernel I'm running, I have an update. How are you going to handle the updates in these vehicles since it will be a licensing model? Will that be handled by you or will that be handled by your OEM partners?
It depends a little bit on what the nature of the deployment is. We already have the infrastructure today to update all of our R&D fleet over the air, and so whether you come for a ride along in one of our Prius vehicles or whether you look at our driverless deployment with the R3 delivery bot, we can constantly update that software to reflect the latest and greatest autonomy that we're building in house. And so as things improve, we can constantly push those out and improve the performance of the system. So, depending on the actual commercial arrangement, that could look a little bit different, but it's something that we're effectively already doing today and will be set up to do in the future with our commercial deployments.
Looking at the market, since the presidential election, Tesla's done one thing. It's absolutely roared. It's skyrocketed as investors really get on the autonomy hype train. How it ends, not giving a comment on that, but I'm saying where it is currently, it's going. And speaking to a lot of analysts, buy side, sell side, speaking to large institutional fund managers, there's this overarching question. How can an OEM build their own version of FSD? Could that be Nuro? Could you be Acme OEMs or Bob's OEM or Jane's OEM? Could you be their version of FSD? Is that where you want to go with your licensing model?
That is certainly an aspiration of ours. I think you are correct in that the progress that we've seen from Tesla with FSD performance has created a lot of competitive pressure. Consumers look at vehicles they're considering buying and saying, what is the sophistication and performance of the ADAS system that this car has? And to the extent an OEM does not have a product that is competitive or at least compelling, that can be a real deterrent to a consumer buying that car. And I think the fact that Tesla has done what it has lit a fire under a lot of folks to say, okay, again, we need a solution. And I'll be honest with you, building autonomy is hard, as you know. And so these companies that have very sophisticated in-house engineering teams that perhaps historically weren't as indexed as heavily on building software, they are realizing that they have to figure out how to compete. And so we think of our value prop to them as partly how do you create an offering that is really compelling to consumers? And I think the fact that we have done so many driverless deployments at a very high safety bar, and we focus so much on a cost effective set of hardware makes Nuro really attractive to them because it solves both the very high safety bar that they have to achieve for their customers, and it solves for the price sensitivity that their customers have. So in sum, yeah, we absolutely aspire to help OEMs build really compelling L2 Plus and L3 products. And we'll have more to share on that soon in terms of commercial announcements.
Look at where the market is today. You bet right. Let's just be blunt and honest with this. Bet right. Going back to Neuro 1.0, what did you see in the market? How did you get here? Obviously, you had the AI breakthroughs internally, but to me, it seemed like there was more here because your bet was spot on to where the market's going.
When we think about the first 6 years of the company, we were very focused on constraining the problem to delivery, as we've talked about. And at the time, I think that made a lot of sense because of the nature of the technology development. But as AI and ML proliferated across the stack, things just got, or I should say, progress just accelerated in areas that we didn't predict back in 2016 when the company was formed. And so it changed the overall calculus in terms of how you constrain the technology problem and led us to say we should pursue both human and goods transport and not constrain it. And then I think the other piece is on the macro front. In a low interest rate environment, companies have incentive to take on as much of the value chain as possible. And again, part of that was the nascency of the AV ecosystem and the lack of other parties to do a lot of the functions that we've talked about earlier. But I think one of the benefits of being constrained on the capital front and having to be capital efficient is really looking hard at how do we find a model that is going to adapt to the world and adapt to the market. You just have to be more responsive. And I think so far we're really proud of the decisions that we've made over the last couple of years. That's not to say they've been easy. I think they've certainly come with adversity that we've had to sort through, but we're really proud of where we are today and the momentum that we've built, both on the technology side with this driverless deployment, but also some of the commercial announcements that will be coming soon.
How did the board initially grapple with investors, that high board investors, we're going through this major pivot. What were some of those conversations like? Was there doubtful? Were there questions? What were some of those conversations like?
They've been with us every step of the way. So when you go back a couple years ago to the realization that we might have to shift to a more capital efficient model, they were very involved in that. I think credit to Dave and Jay-Z, our founders. They've always been really, really disciplined stewards of the capital that our investors have given us. And so they've been partners along the way in trying to figure out how do we shift, how do we adapt to the changing macro environment, the changing technological landscape, and the changing AV market. And so we've received a lot of enthusiasm from them in terms of trying to find a model that is very scalable from a capital efficiency and not have this big number in front of us that we have to go raise in order to realize our vision.
Race to survive. There are some companies on the autonomous trucking side and the autonomous vehicle side that they're in this unfortunate race to survive because of the cost to develop this. When do you see more autonomy companies start to take the pivot you've took and say, wait a second, we need to really look at the unit economics. We need to build a business that can be profitable in the next 24 to 36 months, not 10, 15 years down the line?
It's hard for me to say with any specificity what others are thinking, but I'll offer a little anecdote that's going to seem tangential, but I think it is kind of telling. So I spent much of my career at Uber, actually. I was an early employee there, and this was back in kind of the mid 2010s, if you will, when capital was really readily available. And one of the things that was often said internally at the time was, if money can solve the problem, it's not a problem. And so your internal reality and the internal sense of the availability of resources, where the threats are, so on, really dictate how you think about the need to adjust. And so, again, it's hard for me to speculate what others may or may not be thinking. But I think if you put yourselves in the shoes of someone like Nuro, we've seen for many years that we have to survive as an independent company. And that sort of constraint has forced us to be really creative and make hard decisions. But we've been reaping the rewards of that. And so I don't know how the industry will evolve in terms of business model. Maybe they think that capital will just be there and they can respond accordingly. But I think for us, capital efficiency really has become a North Star.
You have to. Any publicly traded company, now I shouldn't say any, I say most properly publicly traded company, because we don't want a luck and coffee of autonomy. Point blank. You need capital efficiency. You need transparent. You have to build a business that can go back to Einstein's famous theory of compound interest. So you want this business to continue to compound and to make money for you and for your shareholders. When you're developing the business, you license the stack to, let's just call it Acme Automotive. Are there restrictions on where the stack can operate initially? And on the backside of that, can your OEM partners build on top of your stack? Is perhaps where the Nuro AI platform comes in?
Sure. So I'd refer back to the announcement we just made a couple weeks ago around this latest driverless deployment. So to put it in perspective, the operational design domain that we can now operate in a driverless capacity is effectively all surface streets. And so when we were at the point of, again, a few years ago, planning to scale the delivery business with R3, this was the point of autonomy maturity where we were going to say, it's off to the races. Let's really hit the gas and scale because of how broad the serviceability is. So the autonomy maturity today is something that you could build a very scalable, effective unit economic business with, should you have a vehicle platform that can scale as well. Now, obviously, we did not make the decision to go forward with producing R3, but had we, that's where we'd be. So hopefully that perspective contextualizes where the autonomy maturity is a little bit today. And so when we think about serving our customers, whether it's a mobility service platform, whether it's an OEM, we are there today where we can deploy driverlessly with a validated safety case on effectively all surface streets. Now, we are also doing testing on highways, as we've talked about. And to the extent that an OEM is looking for help building an L2 plus or L3 product, I'd say that the first setting in which most of those folks want to build on is highways. And so that is a big next step for us in terms of driverless deployment. We're not quite there yet. But overall, we are at a place where we can cover the vast majority of a metropolitan area, city scale, if you will. Now, the Nuro AI platform is a bit different in that it's a set of tools to help an OEM build their own AV solution. We've talked about that a little bit publicly, and we'll share more in due time. But that is not so much geography specific. It's really just a set of foundational AI tools that would help a third party OEM build their own autonomy product.
On surface streets, there is a glaring edge case that I'd love to see fixed. I want to know if you can do it before we get to the complicated part of this edge case. I would love for a personally autonomous vehicle to be able to pull in my driveway, not in front of my driveway. Is that something that you see your stack eventually being able to do if you do license it for personally autonomous vehicles?
Absolutely. Yeah. When we think about the core features or core user experiences that we want to deliver, pulling in or out of a parking space is very much in scope. It's something that we're actively working on. It will absolutely be included.
Now, the back part of that, and this is, I know I'm getting a little greedy on this, but I got to ask, pulling into my garage at my house, is that something that eventually you think could be solved?
That's an interesting question. It's hard to say on the indoor garage front. I am not an autonomy engineer, so I don't want to speculate, but I'm optimistic the answer is yes.
Okay, so I'll say yes and a yes. And now I'm going to put my institutional hat on. I speak to a lot of institutional investors, and they're perplexed for why highways are so difficult when yet your stack can clearly operate on local roads, surface streets. Why is highways so difficult to drive on, especially when you go full driverless?
Anytime you introduce more speed into the equation, the risk gets higher and the technical challenge also gets higher. The faster you are going, the longer in front of you need to see in order to be able to make safe, effective decisions around behavior. And so the technical complexity just changes. That's not to say that it's fundamentally harder on highways than it is on surface streets. In fact, surface streets actually create a lot of complexity that highways don't have. So I think it's kind of up to the individual to decide whether surface streets or highways are fundamentally more complex. But again, speed just changes things. It just changes the severity of accidents should they occur. It changes the reaction times needed. It changes the distance needed to perceive one's surroundings. So it's just a different problem.
Is that where really good state of the art perception comes in? Because you're right, your stopping is a lot further than if you're on a surface street doing 25, 30 miles an hour. Is that where perception comes in so you can have that ability to see pretty far down the road?
I'm going to get out of my depth on this quickly as someone who's not a perception engineer. I think in general, when you build a perception system, you are trying to understand the world that is around you in a way that allows you to react in time and at a high enough frequency to avoid bad situations. Now, when it comes to highway versus surface streets, so on, I think everyone has their own opinion around what is required. Some are vision only, some think long range LiDAR is necessary. So I don't think it's within my technical competence to say what the definitive answer is. But ultimately, to build a safe self-driving system, you need a really robust set of sensors on the car that can perceive the world around it and allow the behavior system to respond accordingly.
Eventually, at some point in the future, the Nuro Driver will be able to go on highway and surface street, same sensor set eventually, sometime in the future?
Correct. That's what we believe.
Okay, well, I believe you too. So we're doing good on that standpoint. You were very kind to host me at your headquarters in Mountain View. We went for a ride in the Prius, and as I said earlier, it worked very, very well. It was flawless, no interventions. Will the Nuro Driver work on other types? Maybe if we go up to say a Camry size or a Sienna minivan, are you building the Nuro Driver to be scalable to different vehicle platforms?
Absolutely. When we think about the extensibility of the Nuro Driver, we want it to work on effectively any passenger vehicle. That's not to say that the technical integration is easy to achieve that, but from a core autonomy system perspective, there really is no reason why it couldn't work on a number of different vehicles. And I think one of the things that we are really proud of and that has resonated with potential OEM partners is the fact that we've actually integrated it on 8 different vehicle platforms already. So you may recall from being in our office that we have a poster on the wall of all the different vehicle platforms that we've integrated the Nuro Driver onto, ranging from the 3 generations of custom Nuro delivery bot to different generations of Prius to actually a full semi-truck. And so I think the ability to put it on different platforms and actually work with different manufacturers on that front is something that has really differentiated us in terms of working with these potential partners.
Years and years ago, I love us. We keep going in the Wayback Machine, and I'm going to go in the Wayback Machine. Years ago, you were actually one of the first companies to license a stack. You licensed it to a company, Ike, which was named after Eisenhower. And then later you acquired Ike. Was that some of that core engineering that they built on top of your stack integrated to, you could do the class 8 truck?
There has been a lot of the technology that Ike built that has been integrated into our AV system. I wouldn't say that it is specifically designed with the intent of working on a class 8 truck in the short term. It's possible that long term we will expand to that sort of form factor, but it's not in the roadmap immediately.
And in the long term, could I see that technically then go down to a class 6 vehicle perhaps at some point in the future?
Potentially. Again, I would say trucking use cases are not our focus right now. I think between human transport, both in mobility services and for personally owned vehicles, is enough to keep us busy in addition to the delivery business that we've already been working on. But it's very possible that down the road we start to do that.
And as you go down the road, what happens to, I call them the Pixar bots, you call them the R bots. What happens to them? Do you ship them off to Disneyland and Disney World, or what happens to those in the future?
The R3 is still a really important platform for us, both in terms of demonstrating the maturity of our autonomy system. Because again, putting a vehicle out there with a safety driver is very different than validating your system is safe enough to be deployed in a fully driverless capacity. And the fact that the R3 is an occupantless vehicle, it cannot hold a person, very clearly establishes putting those vehicles on public roads as a driverless deployment. And we're very proud and we can stand behind how we validated the performance of our autonomy system in that capacity. So from an R&D perspective, it's still very important. From a commercial perspective, we won't be scaling it, as we've talked about, but we do expect to do commercial deliveries with that vehicle with existing partners very soon. So stay tuned for more on that.
And then are you still testing those vehicles? I believe it was the Las Vegas Motor Speedway years and years ago where you would test them. Are you still testing them there?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a facility at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway that we use for a lot of our vehicle testing and autonomy R&D. We'd love to host you there at some point if you're in the Vegas area. But yeah, we have a whole test track where we do a lot of our closed course testing.
Will you, at that same location, going back, calling it Acme Automotive, since a racetrack, you can go pretty quickly, will you test some of the integrations with your OEM partners there? Or do you have a Skunk Works facility very similar to what Apple had out in the middle of nowhere in northern Arizona?
I will say that we will do testing with our commercial partners in a variety of settings and in a variety of geographies. Las Vegas Motor Speedway will definitely be one of them.
You're getting all the pieces together. You have the R business that, as you clearly say, will operate in, I'll call it, limited capacity. You have licensing, which is going to be the overall juggernaut of your business. You're capital efficient. How do you see Nuro in this licensing business scaling? Is it try and do licensing deals with multiple OEMs? Are you going to look to expand globally? How do you see that business growing?
So just to restate the two verticals that we are pursuing from a commercial standpoint, we have L4 mobility service platforms, and then we have the L2 plus L3 personally owned vehicles, and eventually up to L4 personally owned vehicles with automotive OEMs. And so when we think about scaling in the US in the coming years, but before the end of the decade, we think about scaling both the delivery service and ultimately a robotaxi service with mobility service platform partners and trying to build that business out and, again, license the Nuro Driver onto vehicles for those use cases. And then on the personally owned vehicle side, we will be working with OEMs to help them build L2 plus, L3, and ultimately L4 systems to be deployed on personally owned vehicles. And so we believe today that North America will be the focus to start. I think you'll see scale beginning to arrive here the next couple of years. And from there, it's just a matter of continuing to sign new partners, integrate onto new vehicle platforms, and meet the demand. Being demand constrained is not something that we worry about a whole lot. I think the size of this opportunity is, depending on how you slice it, in the trillions. And so it's just a matter of establishing the foundational partnerships today that will help that ecosystem build and help us scale into the future as autonomy matures.
There's no doubt autonomy is maturing, and there's no doubt autonomy is scaling. Licensing to Robotaxi, that's very interesting. Will that be licensing it to an OEM? Will that be licensing it to an individual that's got a healthy balance sheet that buys a fleet of 1,000 vehicles and you upfit them? Will it be Going to my favorite topic, are you licensing it to a brand that's buying vehicles and wants to operate a service? What does that look like?
2025 will be the year when the overall contour of the ecosystem starts to become more clear. I think we're seeing the foundation being laid today with various commercial arrangements that are in the works. We'll have more to share on that soon. But again, I think you'll see multiple parties involved. And so you'll see a Nuro, an AV system provider. You'll see a mobility service platform that kind of aggregates the demand, brings the marketplace together. You will also see an auto manufacturer to provide the vehicle. Then you'll probably see a third party fleet operator and owner as well. And so, what the division of roles and responsibilities is, I think, again, will become more clear in the coming months and quarters. But 2025 is going to be a really interesting year for Nuro and for the AV industry. And I think you'll start to see more concretely what the business model looks like and who does what within the ecosystem.
The bottom line that we can agree on today is that you're not going to own the asset. Is that a fair statement?
That is indeed a fair statement. We are focusing on our core competency of building autonomy, building a self-driving system, and we will be licensing that self-driving system into an ecosystem of both mobility service platforms, OEMs, and fleet operators.
I've said this now, probably going on a decade, and I'm going to say this again, that Louis Vuitton will be the most profitable robotaxi brand in history because somebody like yourselves can license to them. They create the interior, they create the experience, they integrate it into their ever-growing experiences and hotel portfolio with Belmont and Cheval Blanc. That becomes very interesting. Will you ever consider licensing it to a brand like that that has a very, very healthy balance sheet?
That is a really interesting idea. It's hard to say what that would look like, but I think to the extent that we see an opportunity to license a Nuro Driver into an ecosystem like I described, that's an interesting opportunity to us.
I'll take it one step further. You can look at, if you look at the global hospitality hotel industry, their key metric is RevPAR. It stands for revenue per available room. Peninsula very famously has a thing called Peninsula time. There's no check-in time. There's no checkout time. You tell them when you want to leave, when you want to check in. You can stay for 24 hours. Hypothetically, Peninsula operates a fleet of these like they operate the minis today. They know when you're coming, when you're leaving. You optimize RevPAR. That becomes a very big business. It creates a ton of value. And you're operating a constrained ODD. Becomes very, very interesting where you do what you do best. You create the Nuro Driver. They do what they do best. They provide world-class hospitality. In order to do this, there's a little thing called insurance that we need to figure out. Have you thought about the insurance elements or requirements as you license the Nuro Driver and what those might look like?
Absolutely is the short answer. I think I'd probably defer back a little bit to my response around how the ecosystem is developing and the different roles and responsibilities becoming more clear. Ultimately, if we are putting a self-driving system on the road, regardless of form factor, regardless of kind of commercial application, whether it's mobility service platform, whether it's personally owned vehicle, we have to feel confident. We have to certify in some capacity that the system is safe. We have to validate that. And in doing so, that obviously creates certain liability. And so very specifically, how the liability is divided, how insurance sits on top of it to protect the various folks involved, I think will become clearer over time. But for us, it really starts with being able to validate the safety and performance of our system to a very high confidence level. And I think if we can do that, the overall actuarial analysis and the risk analysis will lend itself to an insurance product that will make the economics work. That's my belief.
I believe you're right. Sergey from Coop will tell you the same thing. Do you feel that your customers, partners will want a third-party audit validation, or do you feel that they will take, I'll call it the Nuro seal of approval?
That is a really interesting question. I think to the extent that folks follow the regulatory landscape for AVs, they will know that there isn't a universally accepted set of standards for what a safe system is. There's not that set of standards at the state level, the federal level, it doesn't exist. And so it'll be interesting to see what the regs look like as commercial deployments start to scale. Does the government get to the point of saying, here's what safety looks like, here's what it doesn't look like? I will say that in the meantime, we hold ourselves to a very high safety bar just in terms of core values. And when we think about doing driverless deployments, we put together a full safety case that we validate with extensive testing. And to the extent that we do that deployment with a commercial partner, they are obviously very interested in saying, okay, how high is this bar really? And so we work very closely with them to show and demonstrate just the extent to which the lengths that we have gone to in order to show that safety. And so it's not something that we think about as being something we're not already doing. But obviously, as the regulatory landscape changes, we'll adapt with it.
You'll adapt with it, but today you really don't have to, because what you're selling as a licensing, you have to make sure it works. If you want to build your business, you have to make sure it works. And if I'm licensing the Nuro stack from you, you've got a lot more on the line than I do. Let's just be honest. And you have to go there and you have to have your word on it. So I'll take your word for that. I'm a big fan of Nuro 2.0. I love where you've gone. I want to know where you're going. What is the future of Nuro?
If I had to distill down the value prop of Nuro and the core value of our offering, we are trying to build the most scalable AI-powered driver out there. And so we are trying to be capital efficient as a company. We're trying to make the hardware cost of the system low enough to make the unit economics work for our customers. And we are trying to establish the foundational relationships that will allow us to actually scale that into many thousands and ultimately millions of vehicles. And so when I think about now and the end of the decade, I would say the prediction I feel very confident making is you'll see the Nuro Driver power robotaxis at scale. You'll see the Nuro Driver power delivery services at scale. You'll also see the Nuro Driver power L2 plus or L3 systems for personally owned vehicles at scale. So all the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years to make the product so compelling from a unit economic standpoint, to make the company as durable as it is from a capital efficiency standpoint, and to make the overall system and business model so scalable, will start to pay dividends and actually achieve scale. Again, I feel very confidently before the end of the decade.
Nuro's building a business. It's building a highly scalable business. And at some point, hopefully you'll power the Louis Vuitton autonomous vehicle, because I believe in my gut of guts that is coming, and it could be powered by Nuro. It's very clear that you need to watch Nuro, because there's big things coming. They clearly are skating to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is Nuro. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thanks, Grayson. Great to see you. And if the Louis Vuitton Nuro Driver vehicle ever happens, I'll give you credit for the idea.
Awesome. You got a deal.
All right. Thanks, Grayson.